Treehouses are the best places to make memories as a kid, if you're lucky enough to have had one. But when one Canadian kid discovers that there is something taking interest in his treehouse that isn't human, it changes his favorite place forever. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and today's episode is an assortment of scary true stories, featuring encounters with little humanoids in the woods, a creepy taxidermied dog, and some folks who break into an old hospital and see something they shouldn't see. Enjoy. Send me your scary stories of the unknown at darkstories.org. Follow and rate Unexplained Encounters on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And check out my new upcoming book, Creepy Campfire Stories, at creepycampfirestories.com, or look it up on Amazon. Thank you. Now, let's begin. The Little Ones. Green text from Anon. Be me, 16 years old. Sophomore in high school back in 2012. A total weeb along with my best friend, Alex. We had known each other since we were like 5. Both socially awkward, but whatever. At least we had each other. Alex came over to my house almost every weekend. We'd play video games, watch anime, normal dorky stuff. We were both into anime girls, but too awkward to talk to real ones. Dude, I got all this rare crap from some guy in a Discord server. Whatever. We're in computer lab looking at his haul. Mostly normal weeb stuff. Then he shows me this folder labeled premium content. It's all perverted stuff, to say the least. Not even that bad by internet standards. But we were idiots, and didn't notice Miss Peterson walking up behind us. "What are you two looking at?" Entire class turns around, absolute mortification. We got sent to the principal's office. Our parents were called. Dad picked me up from school, and it was a silent car ride home. Alex's parents and mine are close, so they called each other. Dad eventually spoke. I talked to Mr. Walker. You boys have 2 options. Be grounded for a month, no internet, no games, or come hunting with me this weekend. Your choice, but you're both getting the same punishment. Alex and I texted each other. We agreed that hunting sounded better than being grounded. At least we'd be outside, doing something. Neither of us had been hunting before, though. Dad was always into it, always tried to get me to go. I'd always said no. Guess this was his chance to force my hand. That Friday after school, Dad picked both of us up in his truck. It was a 4-hour drive to his hunting cabin in northern Michigan, middle of absolute nowhere. No cell service, barely any houses for miles. The cabin is small, rustic, smells like pine and old cigarettes. Dad seemed excited, happier than I've seen him in a long time. This'll make men out of you boys. Eye roll. We unpacked. Dad showed us the gear. Rifles, hunting knives, camo clothes, orange vests. Gives us a lengthy safety lecture that lasts forever. Never point a gun unless you intend to shoot. Always identify your target. Stay within sight of each other. Normal hunting dad stuff, I suppose. We heated up some canned stew for dinner. Early to bed since we'd be waking up at 4 a.m. But I couldn't sleep. The woods make weird noises. Alex was snoring on the bunk above me. I finally drift off around midnight. Waking up at 4 a.m. is brutal. Dad was already up and dressed, making coffee and oatmeal for us. Eat up, boys, we need energy for the day. We get dressed in all the hunting gear, feeling ridiculous in camo. Dad checks our rifles, shows us one more time how to use them safely. Remember, we're hunting deer, nothing else. We hike into the woods while it's still dark. Flashlights pointing at the ground, dew soaking through my boots. It was cold as heck. Could see my breath. We walked for maybe 45 minutes and reached a small clearing. Dad sets up a blind for us to wait in. "This is the boring part. Sit quiet and wait." The sun starts coming up around 6 a.m. Woods gradually become visible. Nothing really happening. Alex keeps fidgeting and Dad keeps giving him stern looks. Around 8 a.m., still nothing. "Let's move on to another spot," Dad whispers. We pack up our minimal gear and start to walk. We go deeper into the forest, trees getting denser, less light coming through. I notice the birds have stopped singing. Strange, but I didn't think much of it. Dad stops suddenly, puts his finger to his lips, points ahead. I don't see anything at first. Then I notice movement about 50 yards ahead. I was expecting to see a deer, but it's not a deer. Can't really tell what it is. Too small, moving strangely. Dad motions for us to get down. We crouch down behind some fallen logs. He takes out his binoculars. He looks for a long time. His face changes. I'd never seen him make that expression before. It's a mixture of confusion and something else. Fear? He hands me the binoculars. "Tell me what you see." I look through the binoculars. I focus on the area where we saw movement. At first, nothing, and then I see them. 3 small figures between the trees, maybe 3 feet tall. I thought they were children at first, but something was wrong about the way they moved. All jerky and strange. Their skin was pale, almost see-through. They wore no clothes, and I couldn't make out facial features clearly. They seemed to be collecting something from the ground. Mushrooms, maybe? I feel Alex nudging me. "Let me see." I hand him the binoculars. I look at my dad. His face still had that weird expression. "What are they?" I whisper. "I don't know," he says, voice different. "Been hunting these woods for 20 years. Never seen anything like that." Alex gasps. "What the heck? What the heck?" he keeps whispering. Dad takes the binoculars back. "We should go," I say. Dad doesn't respond, just keeps staring. Finally, he says, "Yes, but quiet. Don't let them hear us." Start backing away slowly. Alex trips on a root, falls with a loud crash, and his rifle hits the ground. The sound echoes through the forest. Dad freezes, looks back toward where the creatures were. I do too. They've stopped moving. All 3 seem to have turned in our direction. Even from this distance, I can feel them looking at us. Dad whispers, "Run." We take off, crashing through underbrush. Don't care about being quiet anymore, just need to get away. I can hear Dad and Alex behind me, and then Alex yells. I turn around. The idiot has fallen again, and Dad was stopping to help him. "Keep going," Dad shouts at me. "Back to the cabin. We'll catch up." I hesitate. "Go!" he screams. Never heard him yell like that before. So I run, heart pounding and lungs burning. No idea if I'm going the right way, just running. Somehow find my way back to the cabin. I burst through the door, lock it behind me, grab Dad's shotgun from the rack. I load it like he taught me. My hand shakes so bad I drop shells on the floor. I sit facing the door and I wait. An hour passes. Then another. The sun's starting to set. Panic is really setting in. I'm about to go look for them when I hear footsteps outside. I grip the shotgun tighter. The door handle turns. It's locked. Then I hear knocking. "Son, it's us. Open up." Dad's voice, but there's something off about it. Dad? Yes, open the door, Alex is hurt. I hesitate. I go to the window and look out. There's Dad and Alex standing there. They look normal, except for Dad's posture. There was something wrong about it, too stiff. Alex won't look me in the eyes. What happened out there? I call through the door. We'll explain inside, open the door. Dad's voice still sounds wrong in a way. Maybe it's a bit more flat, more emotionless. Alex, you okay? I ask. He nods but doesn't speak. There's something wrong. But it's my dad and my best friend. Slowly I unlock the door. They come inside. Dad immediately takes the shotgun from me. Don't need this now, he says, his voice becoming even flatter. Alex sits on the couch, staring at the floor. What happened? I ask again. Dad starts packing our stuff. We're leaving. Now. But what were those things? Dad stops and turns to me. His eyes look different. I can't explain how, but they're not his eyes. What things? He asks. These small creatures we saw. We didn't see anything. There was a bear. We ran. End of story. I know he's lying. I look at Alex. He finally meets my gaze and slightly shakes his head. The message was clear. Don't push it. We pack our things up in silence. Then we drive home. No one speaks the entire 4-hour trip. We drop Alex off at his place. I'll call you tomorrow, I say. He nods, still won't really look at me. He gets out without even saying goodbye. Dad drives us home. Mom asks how the trip was. Fine, Dad says. He goes straight to the basement and stays there all night. Alex doesn't call the next day or the day after, and I can't bring myself to call him like I promised. Not yet. When I see him at school, he acts weird and distant. Dude, what happened after I ran? I ask. Nothing. Like your dad said, it was just a bear. But his voice shakes. Alex, come on. We've been friends forever. He finally looks at me. Just drop it, okay? For your own good. He stops hanging out with me after that. And he even transfers to another school a month later. Never really talked to him again. Things at home get stranger. Dad spends most of his time in the basement now. Sets up a lock on the door. I can hear him talking to himself sometimes, and Mom notices it too. Your father's just going through something, she says. But she looks worried. Dad starts taking long walks at night. Comes back with mud on his shoes. Sometimes small scratches on his arms. He won't explain. And he stops going to work, loses his job, hardly speaks to either of us. When he does, his voice still has that flat quality to it. His movements are still stiff, not like they used to be. And his eyes are still wrong. I don't think he's my dad anymore. It's been 3 months after the hunting trip. I wake up to the sound of screaming. I rush to my parents' bedroom. My mom is on the floor. Dad is standing over her, just watching. I call 911. Paramedics say it's a stroke, a severe one. Dad doesn't go to the hospital with us. He just stays home. Mom is in a coma for 2 weeks. She dies, never wakes up. At the funeral, Dad doesn't even cry. He stands apart from everyone. Several people comment on how different he seems. I try to talk to him about Mom, about anything. He just stares at me with those wrong eyes. It's natural, all part of the cycle. That's the only thing he says. Next year and a half is hell. Just me and not Dad in the house. He barely acknowledges me, spends most of his time locked in that basement. I smell strange things coming from in there, earthy and organic. Sometimes I hear scratching too, and I tell myself it's mice. But I know it's not. Sometimes strange packages arrive. Dad takes them straight to the basement. I find tiny footprints in mud by the back door some mornings. Too small to be human, shaped like feet. Dad eats less and less. He starts to get thin, and his skin begins to look very, very pale. I count my days until my 18th birthday, and I plan my escape. Finally, I turn 18 and graduate high school. I get accepted to a college in California, and I'll be moving as far away as possible. Dad doesn't even come to my graduation. I pack my things while he's on one of his night walks, planning to leave the next morning. That morning, Dad's in the basement. I knock on the door to say goodbye, but there's no answer. I leave a note instead. Drive to California and start my new life. I try to forget. I mostly succeed. My first semester goes well. I make new friends, normal friends, and I never tell anyone about what happened. Who's gonna believe something like this? First winter break, I don't want to go home. But I do want to get the rest of my stuff that I was in too much of a hurry to grab back then. So I drive back, and the house looks abandoned. Grass overgrown and the mail is piled up. Neighbors say Dad has not been there in months. Haven't seen him whatsoever. I use my key. The house smells so moldy and earthy, like the basement smell, but everywhere. Dad's room is empty, the closet is empty. There's no sign of him. I gather my things quickly, forcing myself to check the basement. A key to the lock is hanging on the nail beside the door. My hand shaking as I unlock it. I steel myself, open the door. The basement is empty. Completely empty. Not even Dad's tools or workbench are there. Just concrete floor and walls. Except for one thing, a small piece of paper in the center of the room. I pick it up. There are 3 words written in Dad's handwriting. The little ones. I panic and run upstairs. Something catches my eye in the kitchen. Small footprints and dust on the floor. They lead to the back door. Multiple sets, different sizes, one large set mixed with them. Bare feet, but with too many toes. I call the police. They investigate. A missing persons report is filed. Adults have the right to disappear if they want to, officer tells me. They don't care about the footprints. Just another missing middle-aged man. Happens all the time, they say. Once I'm legally able to, I sell the house, and I never go back to my hometown. I finish college, get a job, normal life, and I still have nightmares about the woods, about Dad's wrong eyes, about small, pale figures moving between trees. Were they the little ones? Trapped in the Treehouse, from Bingo. I grew up in Peterborough, Ontario, about 2 hours northeast of Toronto. My parents bought our house in 1993 when I was 4, mainly because the backyard was huge by suburban standards. Almost half an acre with mature trees, and a creek running along the back edge of the property. The previous owners had left behind a treehouse built between 2 massive oak trees near the back fence. My dad spent the first summer reinforcing it. adding better walls and a proper roof. By the time I was 7, it had become my favorite place in the world. The treehouse sat about 12 feet off the ground, accessible by a wooden ladder my dad had bolted to one of the oaks. It wasn't fancy, just a 6x8 platform with plywood walls and a slanted roof. But to me, it felt like a castle. You could see the whole backyard from up there, plus the creek and the conservation area beyond our property line. My parents let me play up there unsupervised, once I proved I could climb the ladder safely, though my mom insisted on checking on me every hour or so. The summer I turned 9 was when everything changed. My best friend at the time was Eric Lindstrom, who lived 3 streets over. We'd been friends since kindergarten. We bonded over our shared obsession with dinosaurs and space. That July, Eric's parents were going through a messy divorce, so he spent most days at my house, while his mom worked and his dad had moved to an apartment downtown. We practically lived in that treehouse that summer. We'd haul up comic books, snacks, Eric's portable CD player, and spend entire afternoons up there. Sometimes we'd pretend we were astronauts in a space station. Other times we were explorers in the Amazon. Normal kid stuff. The first weird thing happened in early August. We were up in the treehouse around sunset, reading old Goosebumps books, when we heard something moving in the creek. Not unusual. We often saw raccoons, skunks, even the occasional deer. But this sounded bigger, splashing through the water rather than drinking from it. We peered out the window, really just a square cut in the plywood. But the sun was in our eyes, and we couldn't see much. Eric suggested we climb down to investigate, but something made me hesitate. The splashing had stopped, replaced by a sound I couldn't quite identify, like heavy breathing mixed with a low, clicking noise. I told Eric we should stay put until whatever it was moved on. He called me a chicken, but he didn't climb down either. After about 10 minutes, the sounds faded. We eventually went back to our books, though I kept glancing out the window. When my mom called us in for dinner, we scrambled down the ladder and ran to the house without looking back. I didn't mention the noises to my parents. A few days later, Eric was sleeping over. We'd convinced my parents to let us sleep in the treehouse, something we'd been begging to do all summer. My dad strung up a camping lantern and made us promise to come inside if we got scared or if it started to rain. We hauled up sleeping bags, pillows, and enough junk food to last us a week. Around 11 o'clock, we were telling scary stories when we heard my neighbor's dog, Buster, start barking like crazy. Buster was an ancient beagle who barely moved anymore, so hearing him that worked up was strange. Then he went silent mid-bark, like someone had pulled his batteries out. Eric and I looked at each other. I asked if he thought something was wrong with Buster. He shrugged, but I could tell he was nervous too. We turned off the lantern and looked out the window toward the Cohen's yard. Their motion sensor light had come on, illuminating their back patio. But we couldn't see Buster anywhere. Then the light went out. A few seconds later, it came on again, then off, on, off, like something was triggering it repeatedly. Eric whispered that maybe it was just a cat. I nodded, wanting to believe him. But cats don't usually set off those lights. You need something bigger. The light stopped flickering and stayed off. We waited, barely breathing, just listening for any sounds. And then we heard the breathing again. That same heavy, labored sound from the creek, but closer now. It seemed to be coming from our yard, somewhere below the treehouse. I grabbed Eric's arm and he didn't pull away. We sat frozen, afraid to move or make any noise. The breathing circled the tree, accompanied by the sound of something moving through the grass. Not footsteps exactly, more like something being dragged. Every few seconds, there was that clicking noise, like teeth chattering but slower. Eric mouthed the word bear to me. We'd heard about black bears wandering into suburban areas sometimes, though I'd never seen one in Peterborough. I nodded, clinging to that explanation. A bear made sense. A bear was something real, something adults would understand. The sounds continued for what felt like hours, but it was probably only 5, maybe 10 minutes at most. Then, it just suddenly stopped. We waited another 20 minutes before Eric suggested we make a run for the house. I told him no way. Whatever was down there might still be around. He didn't argue. We spent the night huddled in our sleeping bags, taking turns keeping watch. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made us jump. When dawn finally came, we practically flew down the ladder and ran inside. My mom found us on the couch, still in our sleeping bags, claiming we'd come in because of mosquitoes. I wanted to check the yard for tracks or signs of what had been there, but I was too scared to go look alone, and Eric refused to go with me. Later that day, while Eric was at his dad's apartment, I finally worked up the courage to investigate. The grass around the treehouse was matted down in a rough circle, like something large had been moving around it. But there were no clear footprints, no claw marks on the trees, nothing that might prove what we'd heard. Over the next week, more strange things happened. Our trash cans got knocked over twice by something, the contents scattered across the driveway, and I had to pick it up, but it didn't look rummaged through, like the way raccoons would do. I mean, the food wasn't even touched. Then there was the smell. It started to appear randomly, usually in the evening. Thick and musty, like wet dog. It would hang in the air for a few minutes, then disappear completely. My mom thought a skunk might be living under our deck, but when Dad checked thoroughly, he found nothing. Eric and I avoided the treehouse for several days, but eventually we went back up. We told ourselves we were being babies, that it had just been a bear or maybe a really big raccoon, but we only went up during bright daylight, and we always left well before sunset. The second major incident happened during another sleepover, this time in my actual bedroom. It was past midnight, and we were playing Nintendo 64 when we heard something hit my window. Not hard, just a light tap. We paused the game and listened. Another tap, then another. My bedroom was on the second floor facing the backyard. I had one of those big windows with a wide sill where I kept some toys and books. We crept over to look out, staying low. The moon was almost full, casting silver light across the yard. At first, we saw nothing strange, but then Eric grabbed my shoulder and pointed. Something was moving near the treehouse. It was hard to make out details in the moonlight, but it looked tall, maybe 7 feet, and thin, too thin. It moved in a strange, jerky way, like it was unused to walking upright. As we watched, it approached the oak tree and began to climb. But it wasn't climbing our ladder. It was scaling the trunk itself, using long arms to pull itself up in quick spider-like movements. Within seconds, it disappeared into the treehouse. We backed away from the window, terrified. Eric asked in a shaky voice what we should do. I said we should get my parents. But we didn't. We were 9-year-old boys, and some part of us knew that adults would not believe us. I knew we would be told we were seeing things, to go back to bed, that we had scared ourselves silly with those scary stories we liked so much. So we stayed in bed, staring at my window, waiting for something to happen. About an hour later, we saw it again. This time it was on the ground, standing near the creek. Even from a distance, something about its proportions was wrong. Its arms hung down past where its knees should be. It stood there for several minutes, perfectly still, facing our house. Then it turned and walked into the conservation area, disappearing among the trees. We didn't sleep that night. In the morning, we tried to convince ourselves we'd imagined it, that the moonlight had played tricks on us. But when we finally went to check the treehouse later that day, we found things had been moved. Our comic books were stacked in a perfect pyramid in the center of the floor. The lantern, which we always kept hanging from a nail, was on the ground outside, placed carefully against the tree trunk. That was the last time either of us went up to the treehouse that summer. Eric started spending more time with his dad after that, and by September, when school started, we had drifted apart. He never talked about what we saw, and neither did I. My parents noticed I'd stopped playing in the treehouse, and just assumed I'd grown out of it. These strange incidents continued sporadically through the fall. Our outdoor furniture would be rearranged overnight. My mom's garden gnomes would disappear and reappear in different spots. The clicking sounds and heavy breathing became occasional background noise on quiet nights, though I was the only one who seemed to notice. That winter, during a particularly bad ice storm, one of the oak trees split and fell, taking half the treehouse with it. My dad had the remains torn down for safety reasons. Honestly, I was secretly relieved. Whatever had been visiting our yard seemed to lose interest after that. The strange sounds stopped. The smell disappeared. Life went on. Years later, when I was in high school, I was doing some sort of natural science project, and I stumbled upon some information about the conservation area. The conservation area behind our house had apparently been part of a larger forest that the indigenous people had considered taboo. They told stories about tall, thin creatures that lived in the deep woods, beings that walked upright but were not human, beings that could climb trees like squirrels and make clicking sounds to communicate. I never found out exactly what Eric and I encountered that summer. Part of me wants to believe it was just overactive imagination, that we scared ourselves with shadows and normal animal sounds. But I'm not going to forget what we saw, even if I don't like to think about it. Why I Hate Dogs, from Rennie T. When I was a kid, my parents would drop me off at my grandparents' house in Ridgewood almost every other weekend. They lived in this old 2-story colonial with dark wood paneling and too many rooms for just 2 people. The place always smelled like potpourri and old books, mixed with whatever my grandmother was baking. It wasn't a bad setup. I got spoiled with cookies and minimal supervision, except for one thing: Jasper. Jasper was my grandfather's prized German shepherd. He got him before I was born, so by the time I was forming memories, Jasper was already middle-aged for a dog. My grandfather, Arthur, had trained him for some regional obedience competitions when Jasper was younger. The wall in their den was covered with ribbons and photos of Jasper looking regal next to my beaming grandfather. To everyone else, Jasper was this well-behaved, impressive animal. To me, he was a nightmare. The first time I realized something was off about Jasper, I was maybe 5 years old. I was coloring at the kitchen table while my grandmother made lunch. Jasper was lying under the table, supposedly sleeping. I accidentally dropped a crayon, and when I reached down to grab it, Jasper's eyes snapped open. They weren't normal dog eyes in that moment. They were completely focused, calculating. He didn't growl or bare his teeth. That would have been easier to explain to the adults. Instead, he just stared at me with those cold eyes, and I swear he smiled. Not the happy, panting smile people think dogs have, but something knowing and mean. I yanked my hand back so fast I hit it on the table. When I tried to tell my grandmother, she laughed it off, insisting that Jasper loved children and was just playing with me. That was the beginning of a pattern. Whenever adults were watching, Jasper was perfectly behaved. The moment they turned away, he changed. My grandfather constantly praised Jasper, telling anyone who would listen that he was the smartest dog he'd ever seen. He often remarked that sometimes he thought Jasper understood everything they said. My grandmother was just as bad, feeding him bits of meat by hand and talking to him in this high-pitched baby voice that made me cringe. She would ask Jasper if he wanted another piece of chicken in that ridiculous baby talk, answering herself that yes, he did. Meanwhile, I was doing everything I could to avoid being alone with the dog. I'd learned quickly that the grown-ups never believed me about Jasper's behavior. After all, he was such a good dog. When I was 7, I was playing in the backyard while my grandparents gardened. I had this action figure I was really into at the time. Can't even remember which one now. I set it down for a minute to tie my shoe, and when I looked up, Jasper was standing over my toy. He stared directly at me, picked up the action figure in his mouth, and slowly, deliberately crushed it. The plastic cracked loudly between his jaws. Then he dropped the mangled remains at my feet and walked away, his tail wagging like he'd done something clever. When I ran crying to my grandmother, she scolded me for leaving my toys where poor Jasper could mistake them for his own. My grandfather gave me $5 for a new one and told me to be more careful next time. The worst incident happened when I was 9. I was sleeping in the guest room, the one at the end of the upstairs hallway. I woke up around midnight needing to use the bathroom. The hallway was dark, but I didn't want to wake anyone by turning on lights. As I crept down the hall, I heard the click of nails on hardwood. Jasper appeared at the other end of the hallway, just a silhouette in the darkness. He stood perfectly still, watching me. I froze. Something about the way he was standing made my heart race. He wasn't moving like a normal dog. He was too still, too purposeful. I took a step back toward my room, and he took a step forward. I stepped back again, and so did he. It was like some twisted mirror game. When I finally turned to run back to my room, I heard him coming after me, nails clicking rapidly on the floor. I barely made it through the door before shutting it behind me. He hit the door with a thud, then silence. I stood there trembling, afraid to move. Then I heard it, scratching at the door, slow and methodical. Not the frantic scratching of a dog that wants to be let in, but deliberate, almost like he was drawing something. It went on for nearly an hour before stopping. In the morning, there were deep gouges in the bottom of the door. My grandfather seemed more confused than angry. He examined the scratches, commenting that this wasn't like Jasper at all, and that he'd never done anything like this before. But he was looking at Jasper with an expression I couldn't quite place. Not anger, but something close to concern, or maybe even fear. It was the first time I'd seen any adult react to Jasper's behavior with anything other than dismissal. Something about that scared me even more. When I was 11, Jasper died. I wish I could say I was sad, but honestly, I was relieved. I was staying with my grandparents that weekend when it happened. Jasper had been acting strange all day, more aggressive than usual, pacing the house and growling at nothing. That night, my grandfather had to lock him in the basement because he wouldn't stop barking. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to complete silence. The kind of silence that feels wrong when you're used to hearing the normal creaks and settling of an old house. I remember lying there, suddenly aware that I couldn't hear Jasper in the basement anymore. No barking, no pacing, nothing. In the morning, my grandfather found him at the bottom of the basement stairs, dead. The vet later said it was a heart attack, common for his age and breed. But what the vet didn't see was what I glimpsed before my grandmother shooed me away. The expression on Jasper's face. His lips were pulled back in what looked like a snarl, his eyes wide open and staring at nothing. He didn't look peaceful. He looked angry. I thought that would be the end of Jasper. I was wrong. 3 months after Jasper died, I came to stay with my grandparents and discovered something horrifying in the den. There, positioned near my grandfather's favorite chair, was Jasper, stuffed and mounted in a standing position. His fur had been expertly groomed, his posture regal and alert, just like in those competition photos. But the taxidermist had done something wrong with his eyes. They were glass, of course, but they seemed to follow you around the room. My grandfather proudly asked if I thought Jasper looked magnificent, adding that now he would always be with them. My grandmother seemed less enthusiastic, but went along with it. She explained quietly that my grandfather couldn't bear to part with Jasper, and that this was his way of coping. That night was the first time I experienced what would become a pattern of strange events. I was reading in bed when I heard it. The familiar click of nails on hardwood in the hallway outside my room. My blood ran cold. I told myself it was just the house settling or my imagination. Then my door, which had been closed, slowly creaked open a few inches. I sat paralyzed, staring at that gap, certain I would see Jasper's face appear. Nothing did. When I finally worked up the courage to get up and check, the hallway was empty. I looked down the stairs toward the den. In the dim light, I could make out Jasper's taxidermied form, exactly where it had been earlier, unchanging and still. I closed my door, wedged a chair under the handle, and barely slept that night. The next morning, I found small, dusty paw prints on the hardwood outside my door. When I showed my grandmother, she frowned and muttered something about the neighbor's cat somehow getting in. But we both knew the neighbors didn't have a cat. Over the next 2 years, my weekend visits became increasingly terrifying. Objects would move around the house, usually my things, displaced or hidden. I'd find my backpack unzipped, homework scattered. Once I found my sneaker chewed up in the garden, covered in dirt and saliva. The taxidermied Jasper never seemed to move, but sometimes I'd enter the den and find him facing a different direction, though my grandparents insisted nothing had changed. The incidents escalated gradually. I'd wake up to find my blankets pulled off in the night. I'd feel something pressing down at the foot of my bed, like a dog settling into sleep. But nothing was there when I turned on the light. The clicking of nails became a regular nighttime occurrence, always stopping outside my door. My parents didn't believe me. My grandparents were concerned but confused. They never experienced anything themselves. My grandfather would suggest that maybe the house was just settling, though I could tell he was troubled. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at taxidermied Jasper with an uncertain expression. The final incident happened when I was 14. I was staying over during spring break. My grandparents had gone to bed early, leaving me watching TV downstairs. I must have dozed off on the couch because I woke up suddenly around midnight. The TV was still on, casting flickering blue light across the room. I had that feeling of being watched. Taxidermied Jasper was gone from his usual spot. I sat up, fully awake now, my heart pounding. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe my grandfather had moved him for cleaning. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I decided to go upstairs to my room, walking as quietly as possible. Each step on the old staircase seemed to creak louder than normal. When I reached the top, I heard it, the clicking of nails on hardwood coming from my room. I should have run to my grandparents' room, but fear rooted me to the spot. I approached my bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. With a trembling hand, I pushed it open. There in the center of my room was Jasper. Not the stiff taxidermied version, but something else. He looked solid but somehow wrong, like a poor quality photograph brought to life. His fur was dull, his movements jerky, but his eyes, they were exactly as I remembered them, cold and calculating. When he saw me, his mouth opened in what I can only describe as a smile, revealing teeth that gleamed unnaturally white in the darkness. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only watch as he slowly approached me, his nails clicking on the hardwood floor with each step. When he was directly in front of me, he stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, faster than I could react, he lunged forward, grabbing a mouthful of my hair. The pain snapped me out of my paralysis. I screamed as Jasper began dragging me by my hair into the hallway. I clawed at the doorframe, trying to grab onto something, anything. My screams finally woke my grandparents, who came rushing from their room at the end of the hall. My grandfather started to ask what was happening, then stopped mid-sentence, his face draining of color as he saw what was happening. The moment the hallway lights switched on, Jasper vanished. Not ran away, not hid, vanished, like a candle being blown out. 1 second he was there, solidly gripping my hair in his teeth, and the next, he was gone. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing. My grandmother helped me to my feet, while my grandfather stood frozen, staring at the empty space where Jasper had been. I asked him through tears if he had seen it too. He nodded slowly, his face ashen. He admitted that he had seen something. That night, while I lay trembling in my grandparents' room, there was no way I was sleeping alone. I heard my grandfather go downstairs. There was silence for a long time, then the sound of the back door opening and closing. In the morning, taxidermied Jasper was gone. My grandfather refused to tell me exactly what he'd done with it, only assuring me that it had been taken care of. He finally admitted that he'd experienced things too. Items moved, strange noises, a persistent feeling of being watched. He'd dismissed it all, convinced it was just grief and imagination. He confessed that he couldn't let go, and he thought that was what kept Jasper there. I never stayed overnight at my grandparents' house again. My parents didn't understand, but they respected my refusal. My grandfather got rid of all of Jasper's things, the ribbons, the photos, everything. The only explanation he ever offered was that some things shouldn't be preserved. Years later, after both my grandparents had passed away, and we were cleaning out their house, I found a small metal box buried in the garden under an unmarked stone. Inside was a dog collar, worn and faded, with the name Jasper barely visible on the tag. Next to it was a note in my grandfather's handwriting. The note said that some doors, once opened, are hard to close. I reburied the box exactly where I found it and never told anyone. Some things are better left undisturbed. I still sometimes wake up in the night to the phantom sound of nails clicking on hardwood, and I know that a part of Jasper is still out there, waiting. But as long as his remains stay buried and forgotten, I think I'm safe. We weren't alone in the building. From Black Dahlia, IX. It was Devil's Night in 2011. I was hanging out with my boyfriend at the time and his friend. I'll call them A and B. We were driving around trying to figure out what to do for the night. And with it being a creepy night, Ghost hunting was definitely top priority, but we weren't sure where we'd end up. B said, "Why don't we go to the old tuberculosis hospital in the next town?" I had never been there, but old abandoned hospitals where all this hurting and death occurred really had my interest. So, we drove the short distance to the hospital. Truth be told, this was not totally legal, so we parked down the street at the local bar and made our way to the hospital on foot. Upon walking onto the property, I instantly got an uneasy feeling. Then I saw it. This monstrous Gothic-style hospital. We made our way to the back of the building, looking for a way in. B found a loose panel of wood covering a window on the ground floor. A went in first, then I entered. Remember how I said I had an uneasy feeling? Well, it was about to start turning into signs that we should not be there. As B was climbing through the window, he somehow twisted his knee and could barely walk after getting into the building. As A was talking to B, trying to figure out if we should even continue, even though we just got there, I started to look around the room we were in. It looked like some kind of waiting room area, but much bigger. There were chairs stacked up along the walls, and a random wheelchair sitting in the middle of the room. B agreed that he was okay to go on. He didn't want to ruin the night. We slowly made our way deeper into the hospital. A led and I followed behind him, trying to stay close since we only had 2 flashlights, and B was following behind us, going at his own pace. We came across a long hallway with doors all open. There were piles of burned patient files, looking like they were trying to hide things that went on in there. As we walked along, the guys told me that this place, after being a TB hospital, was turned into a state mental hospital. We all know how people were treated back then. Not very well. I walked into a room that still had patient files that weren't burned yet. I rummaged through some of the files. Some of the worst cases were there, by some of the files I'd read. So we continued down this long, creepy corridor. I was shining my flashlight into the rooms as we walked down the hallway. Everything was there. Everything. Like someone came in, told everyone to get out, and they all left and tried to burn the evidence, not doing a very good job of it. I saw a room with tubs, I'm guessing ice bath therapy, and also a machine that looked like an electroshock therapy device. At the end of the long T-shaped hallway, you could go left to the cafeteria or right to the elevators and stairs. Me being a stupid teenager seeing a chalkboard, I wrote my name on it. And after doing so, I turned around to look to see where the guys were. I started to walk closer to the elevators, which had doors open and the elevators at the bottom of the shaft. As I walked past the open elevator doors, I noticed that the exit sign and the emergency lights had turned on. Now that should not be possible. There was absolutely no power left to the building. None. As I turned around to ask the guys if those lights should be on, all of a sudden, the entire side of the building lit up. We hurried to hide, knowing darn well it was probably the cops. Now, our hiding was fast, so not too much time to find a room or whatever. A hid to my left by a bunch of tables, B to the right of me, and me right in front of the open elevator doors. Slowly, the lights from outside began to move around the building. We sat there for a good 20 to 30 minutes, while the lights continually circled the building. As we were hiding, we began to hear noises coming from down the hall, and above us, and just everywhere around. We knew the cops had entered the building, and they were searching for us. Crashing noises like they were overturning the tables and opening doors. After what felt like an eternity, listening to all these noises around us, the lights came around one more time. Where I was sitting, I could see down the hallway, and when the lights made that last turn, I looked to a door that I saw movement at. To my horror, As the light started to light up that room from the outside, I saw a man dressed as a doctor exit the door I was looking at. He walked out of the room and turned towards me. He made eye contact, and he threw his arms up, turned, and walked down the hallway. I asked the guys if they had seen what I had, and they said no. At that point, I was ready to get the heck out of there. So, me being completely freaked out, the guys agreed that the cops had no idea where we were hiding. We would just make it easier on them. We would come out and turn ourselves in, since it didn't seem like they were going to leave. So we made our way out of the hospital, back down that long, scary hallway where I just saw a doctor walk out of a room. As we made our way back to the window that we had entered through, the cop grabbed us one by one and dragged us out through the window and threw us against the building. When we were all lined up along the wall, the cop demanded to know if there was anyone else with us. I said, "No, it's just us." "Why? Did you find anyone else? We heard you moving things around looking for us." He looked me in the eyes and said, "No, we never entered the building. We just drove around the building shining our spotlight through the windows. And the only reason we didn't leave was because every turn we made we saw someone walking around in there." At that moment, I realized all those noises we'd heard were probably the ghosts of the residents and the patients that once occupied the building. Now, it being not so legal, we did get booked for breaking and entering, which I had to do community service for. Now, years later, being an avid creepy paranormal lover, I was watching Paranormal Caught on Camera, and this building made the show. A man was ghost hunting and was in the basement. He caught an apparition that moved and looked exactly like the doctor that I saw that night. Still to this day, that hospital scares me, but it also still draws me in. I drive past it every once in a while when I'm in that area. I would love to know who or what I saw and heard that night. Look, if you go around breaking and entering into places, then getting a little haunting is probably to be expected. It's not just the living that might be a little fed up or annoyed when people start to invade on their spaces. Good night. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails. You should send me your stories so I can narrate them at darkstories.org. And help us reach new listeners by following and rating Unexplained Encounters on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Also, Smokey Bear's holding me hostage. And if you want to save my life, all you gotta do is pre-order my new book, Creepy Campfire Stories. Obviously I'm lying, but go to Amazon anyway, check out Creepy Campfire Stories by Darkness Prevails, and consider a pre-order. Thank you. Until next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.